Hello EPQ students. We have only 2 weeks left now until your research proposal is due. So what are we looking at today? We're going to go back and re-examine your research question. We're going to explore it in a lot of detail. And then we're going to look at the importance of breaking down the research question and maybe getting some subheadings. I'm going to use my own research to show you how that works. And that's going to lead into you thinking about what chapter or section headings are you going to have in your report, because a 5,000 word report usually has 2, 3 or 4 different chapters. And then we're going to talk about how important it is to see your supervisor in the next week. Right, so moving on. The research proposal itself, as you know, is due in 2 weeks' time. There is ample guidance for you. And one last reminder that this needs to come in on the final week, or you will unfortunately no longer be on the course. So what is a good research question? A few things to remind you: that it should be non-biased. Really importantly, you must be able to answer it. It definitely has to be relevant. You need to show that it has some kind of relevance to today. It's best if it's intriguing or interesting, pertinent, but really important is that it's focused. It's focused because if it's too general, then it's simply going to become descriptive and not really be answerable. Moving on then. Just to remind you now that usually when we find our research question, it's through a process of narrowing. We start with a general topic such as media violence. We've read quite a bit and we've looked in. We've got into narrowing it. And now we're at the stage where you might want to narrow it further and introduce what we call limiting factors. Typical limiting factors are limiting your research to just boys, gender, for instance, or to a particular age group, or to a particular geographical region. Why is this so important? It's because the research question then becomes focused and answerable. So in today's lesson, not only are we going to look to break down your research question, but I'm going to encourage you to revisit it and to see whether narrowing it would be a good idea or not. Some questions are too broad. For instance, what can be done to raise awareness to protect the environment? I think you can see straight away that that's a terrible research question. It's okay to start off in week 1 of the EPQ like that, but this is more like an answerable one. What should the city's authorities do to raise awareness in primary school students to protect the environment? So it has a specific age group. It has a specific region, the city's authorities, okay, and it has a very, very definite purpose: to protect the environment. In fact, you might criticize it and say protect the environment is a bit too general and that you might want to go more specific than that. So, good research questions, okay, will answer the question posed. They will the introduction should directly address the research question. Usually in the introduction, you put the research question into it and you say, this report will be seeking to find an answer to the following research question. Now, you often use statements like this. This essay, or better, I'm just going to change that live, this report, because we are writing EPQ report. You signpost the aim of the research and you indicate very clearly how you intend to answer the question, okay? So why is the research question so important? Well, it's the go-to place. It's the anchor of your report, okay? So therefore, it has to be clearly defined, all right? It has to be explain why you are undertaking the research. It is effectively the central element of both quantitative and qualitative research. So whether you're using numbers or using interviews, the research question is the center of the entire piece. Most of all, it indicates what you want to know first and foremost. So we signpost the research question all the way through the report, and I'll be talking more about that in a moment. The research question provides our focus, okay? A good research question is like a compass in your report. It's your go-to point that really does define the purpose of the essay. Now, Just to remind you, they need to be answerable, specific and focused, provide a clear sense of purpose. I think that's the most important one. And now the key thing is, often we could break down our research question into what we call subsidiary research questions, smaller research questions, and they can often give us the subheadings in our EPQ. So I'm going to use my own research now to illustrate this process of having a main research question and thinking to yourself how you might break it down into smaller research questions, because this will help you with the overall structure of your EPQ report. My research question is, how might project-based learning, and that's the EPQ, extend the agency? Agency is student freedom, voice and choice. So how might it extend your agency in a British school, curriculum school in the Middle East? Now you see I've had the limiting factors of British school in the Middle East, which means that my case study will be desk. You will be my subjects. My topic is very focused. It is student agency, and I'm going to be looking at how project-based learning impacts student agency. So if we go back to the idea of research question, you can see I have a very clear topic. I've narrowed it down. I've got a real focus there. And now we're going to go on to this idea of how subsidiary questions might work. Just to remind you that agency is the ability to take action or choose what to do. Now, many of you may feel that the curriculum is often written for you. The syllabus is written by people in the UK. Teachers have to follow the syllabus too. The reason why I'm interested in the EPQ is it gives you a great deal of choice. So the EPQ is a type of project-based learning. Project-based learning means that the teacher isn't in charge, that the student actually makes many of the decisions and drives the learning. So let's look at this process of breaking down the research questions and looking for some subsidiary questions, okay? Breaking them down into smaller questions is really valuable because it's a way, that's how analysis works, by breaking things down. This will help you think about the necessary stages in your argument, and that in turn will help you, break down the main question and do what we call chunking. Chunking is when you have a big chunk of something and then you take smaller bits of it to make you understand the bigger bit better. The subordinate or the subsidiary research questions often act as subheadings or sections of your EPQ report. So today's lesson might really help you think about the overall structure of your final report. Now I'm going to show you what I did initially. I've actually changed since this. This is about 1.5 years ago. But these were the subsidiary questions that I used. So just to remind you, that was my research question. How might project-based learning extend the agency of students in a British curriculum school in the Middle East? And here are some of the questions I thought of. What aspects of learning could be neglected by an emphasis on test-based teaching and learning? So here I'm going to set up like, why is it that students get a bit frustrated? They do so many tests, they may not feel they have any choices. My second question, in what ways might the agency of students be restricted by test-based? So here I'm going to look at how you don't get to choose. It's the opposite of agency, it's restrictions. My third question is, how might project-based learning allow students to explore their own interests? And I hope that you are actually experiencing that there. Then my fourth subsidiary question is specific to the EPQ. How could the EPQ enable self-regulated study that is required by universities? Self-regulation is when you're told what not to do. This is why it's so important in the EPQ that I emphasize all the time that you are independent on this qualification. You're not going to be taught. So now I'm going to pause and I'm going to give you the chance to think if you could break down your overall questions, okay? Could you think of any of these subsidiary questions? Can you think of some of the key terms that need to be defined, things that are ambiguous or unclear? And think about how this might help the whole chapter or sections of your overall 5,000-word report. Here is an exercise sheet that I'm giving you. At the top, you will put down your main question, And here you'll see if you could break it down into 3, 4, or maybe even 5 questions. I'm going to pause now and give you a chance to do that. Okay, so you've had a chance to think about that, and I hope that you found it valuable, because it will be the beginning of thinking about the different sections of your report. When you write an essay in school, usually you don't use subheadings, but in an EPQ report you can use them as long as your essay or your report still flows. Why are subheadings so important? Well, as I said before, they chunk your overall report into different manageable, digestible sections, okay? Often the subheadings can be in the form of questions, such as these. Why do we need additional legislation? Or something like this. Is cloning simply too dangerous? Another one might be, is there evidence that there is too much medication for ADHD? Do studies confirm that AI will lead to mass job losses? So if you're doing one on AI, this is if you're doing one on ADHD, this is one if you're doing one on cloning, and this could be one on anything, looking. So these questions can be quite useful. They get the reader thinking, and they also offer you the opportunity of putting your report into nice chunks. I want to remind you that it is so important for your research proposal and for your planning in general that you are thinking about evidence for and evidence against. And part of your research proposal will be that you hand in a table in your appendices showing that you have an argument. I've told you before, and I'll repeat it one more time, that this is to ensure that your report is argumentative. It must be position X versus position Y. This will stop you simply giving lots of description and information. How do we do these tables? Well, I looked up very quickly arguments against cloning, and these were them: that it's not reliable, eliminates genetic diversity, high level of uncertainty, not at all a safe process. Well, if I was doing an argumentative table like this one over here, I might think to myself, it's not a safe process. All right, so on one side of my table, I'll put down and explain exactly why it isn't safe. Then on the other, I would get advocates or proponents of cloning to say why they believe that it is safe. So going back to my table, these are all the reasons why cloning isn't safe, and here is the evidence that it is safe. So I'm thinking in terms of what we call paired arguments. So once you have a kind of argument table, the next thing to think about is structuring it so that there is a debate at the center of your report all of the time. And one of the key ways of doing that is to use ideas like this: proponents versus opponents. So going back to the cloning table, the opponents of cloning versus the proponents of cloning. Another term that might be useful is advocates, people who want it, versus detractors, people who see the bad thing. Supporters versus critics. So if you use this language throughout your report, you will ensure that there is a debate. So it's absolutely key to avoiding this trap of too much information. So overall, what might your overall structure of the report look like? Well, you will definitely have to have an introduction. In the introduction, you will introduce the research question, and you will show why there is an argument. And I have a full separate video for writing introductions, okay? Then in this particular report, I'm going to have 3 sections. I'm going to have argument 1. And again, I'm going to be using this idea of paired arguments that I told you about before. Very useful term, so that you're thinking about for and against all of the time, okay? For the cloning, against the cloning, etc. Okay, here we are, for, against, and this is very important. Every section will require an interim conclusion. That means you've said what the for argument is, or the proponents versus the opponents, and then you'll say which side is stronger. Then you will connect to the next part of your report, and again you will do the proponents versus the opponents with an interim conclusion saying which side is stronger. A third time you will do it with another interim conclusion. Then you will use these interim conclusions to write your final conclusion, where you answer the research question that you put into the introduction. So I'm showing you this, even though we're at an early stage, so you can start to think about what is the shape of your EPQ report going to look like. Now, of course, if you're doing an artifact, it is entirely different, and you will do an entirely different idea from the research question. Very briefly, you will break down your research process instead. You will say, if you're making this dress, for instance, I am going to begin with research. Then I'm going to move on to sketches, okay? Then I'm going to move on to sourcing fabrics. Then I'm going to look at various stitching techniques, etc. So you can do something a little bit similar to this, but I think there will be many, many more stages in terms of an artifact. And that's why artifact planning is usually more complex than report planning, okay? I also want to remind artifact people that you must have some kind of prototype planned. A prototype will be an easy version of the artifact in order to test that the design is feasible or not. Because the worst thing is to do 6 months and then realize that you can't do it, okay? Again, for artifact people, your success criteria will be really important. How do you know that the artifact works? And the success criteria, just like a research question, needs to be very narrow and focused, okay? So again, in your research report for artifact people, I will be expecting you to tell me how you will evaluate it. Will it be a specialist audience? Exactly how will you be able to decide and answer the question, is the artifact fit for purpose? Did it achieve what I set out to do? And the success criteria is, this is what I wanted it to do. So overall, we've gone through a great deal today, and it's for both artifact and report people, it's really important now that you're thinking about the sections of your report that you are going to write. I've gone through the whole idea of how important it is to have debate at the center of the report and to think about this structure of having interim conclusions, okay? And I'm going to end by saying that you need to see your supervisor in the next week. Your research proposal is now due in 2 weeks' time. You need to discuss this with your supervisor. You need to ask yourself, do your questions help to focus your research? Would it be good to have some of these subsidiary questions? And your main question, is it working well, or do you need to revisit it, okay? Then you'll ask yourself, can you start to think about the structure of your report? It's early days, but it's not a bad thing to get planning it, okay? And then finally, the research questions will continue to change as you write. You have until the mid-project review, which is a few months away, to decide if you want to change your question or let your question evolve. Now, good luck with your EPQ research proposals. I do hope that you're able to get them in for week 13. Thanks for listening.